The stars tore open like a wound in space, and 300 massive warships emerged from the light of hyperspace, travel into the darkness of an unfamiliar solar. System War Master Zexter stood at the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, watching the distant blue planet on his viewing screen with cold satisfaction in his 4 eyes. This was Earth, the home world of a species called humans, and it would soon become the 48th system to fall under the control of the mighty Crothax Empire. Status report, Zexter commanded, his voice deep and full of authority that came from conquering dozens of worlds. All 300 capital ships have arrived safely. War Master, his second-in-command Vexenar replied quickly. 2,000 fighter craft are ready for deployment, and weapon systems are fully charged. Zexter nodded slowly, his armored scales clicking together as he moved. The Crothax were a proud warrior race, standing over 8 feet tall with bodies covered in thick natural armor that had evolved over millions of years. They had conquered system after system for the past 500 years, and not once had they faced a serious challenge. The intelligence reports on humanity had been almost laughable to read. These humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel 80 years ago, which was barely a heartbeat in the grand timeline of galactic civilization. They had no major military presence beyond their home system, no history of large-scale space warfare, and their population was concentrated mostly on just one planet. It would be an easy conquest. Just like all the others before it. Open a communication channel to the planet, Zexter ordered. Let us give them the standard offer of surrender. The communication officer worked quickly at his station, and within moments the channel was opened. Zexter cleared his throat and spoke with the weight of empire behind every word. Attention, inhabitants of the planet called Earth, he announced. I am War Master Zexter of the Crothax Empire's 7th Conquest Fleet, and I am here to inform you that your world has been selected for incorporation into our glorious civilization. He paused for effect, enjoying this moment as he always did. You have 6 hours to surrender unconditionally, and if you comply peacefully, your people will be allowed to live as workers in our empire. But if you resist, we will reduce your cities to ash and take what we want anyway. The message ended, and the bridge crew waited in silence for the human response. Minutes passed, and Zexter began to grow impatient. Perhaps these humans were too primitive to even understand the situation they faced. But then the communication officer raised his head with a strange expression on his face. War Master, we are receiving a response from Earth. Put it through, Zexter commanded. A voice filled the bridge, speaking in the harsh language of the humans that the translation systems converted into Crothax speech. Greetings, War Master Zexter, the voice said calmly. This is Admiral Chun Wei of the Earth Defense Force, and I have received your message. Zexter listened with growing amusement as this human admiral continued speaking. We acknowledge your presence in our solar system, and we have carefully considered your offer of surrender. There was a brief pause, and then the human spoke again. Your request is denied, and you have 5 hours to leave our system. The bridge fell into stunned silence. Vexenar made a choking sound that might have been laughter, and several other officers exchanged looks of disbelief. Festar himself stood frozen for a moment before a smile spread across his scaled face. Did this human just threaten us? He asked, his voice filled with dark amusement. Did a species that has barely left their own planet just tell the 7th Conquest Fleet to leave? The entire bridge erupted in harsh laughter, the sound echoing off the metal walls. Star shook his head slowly, almost impressed by the audacity of these creatures. Scan their defenses, he ordered, once the laughter died down. Show me what these brave humans have to protect themselves. The sensor officer worked at his station for several minutes, and when he looked up, his expression was one of confusion. War Master, I am detecting minimal military presence around Earth, he reported. There are some scattered defense satellites and what appear to be civilian stations in orbit, but nothing that could threaten our fleet. No warships? Zexter asked. None that I can detect, War Master. And there are some vessels near their moon, but they appear to be mining operations. Zexter laughed again, this time alone. These humans are either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, he said. They have nothing to fight with, yet they dare to refuse us. He turned to face his crew, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Perhaps they are buying time to evacuate their leaders, Vexnar suggested. We have seen this before with other species. It does not matter, Zexter replied dismissively. Their bravado changes nothing, and in 6 hours, we will begin our assault. He settled into his command chair, feeling the familiar excitement that came before every conquest. Set course for the inner system, he ordered. We will take up position near their moon and prepare for planetary bombardment. The fleet began to move. 300 warships advancing toward Earth like a tide of destruction that had swallowed countless worlds before as they passed the outer planets. Zexter reviewed the intelligence reports on humanity once more. The humans were a young species, prone to fighting among themselves over resources and territory. They had a violent history, but their violence had always been directed inward, never outward toward the stars. They had colonies on their moon and their neighboring red planet called Mars. But these were small outposts with limited populations. Everything about them suggested weakness. A species that had grown comfortable in their isolation and was unprepared for the harsh reality of a galaxy ruled by the strong War Master. The sensor officer called out suddenly, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. Something strange is happening. Zexter leaned forward in his chair. Explain, he demanded. The human stations around Earth, the officer said slowly. They are moving? Moving? Vexnar repeated. Civilian stations do not simply move. I know, Commander, but they are definitely changing position. And I am also detecting power fluctuations that do not match civilian technology. Zexter stared at the viewing screen, watching as tiny points of light near the distant blue planet began to shift and rearrange themselves. A cold feeling began to creep into his chest, something he had not felt in many years. It was doubt. Increase scanning intensity, he ordered. I want to know exactly what those stations are doing. As his officers worked frantically at their stations, Zexter watched the blue planet grow larger on his screen for the first time since entering this system. He wondered if perhaps the humans knew something that he did not, but he pushed the thought aside quickly. They were the Krothax, conquerors of 47 worlds, and no species had ever stood against them and survived. These humans would be no different. They could not be different, could they? The Krothax fleet crossed the orbit of Jupiter, and War Master Zexter felt his confidence returning as they drew closer to their target. Whatever strange movements the human stations had made earlier, it did not matter. 300 warships could not be stopped by mining platforms and communications satellites. We are approaching the human moon, Rexnar announced. Shall the first order the fighter squadrons to launch? Yes, Zexter replied. Send the first wave ahead to clear any resistance, and the main fleet will follow once they report that the path is secure. 200 fighter craft screamed out of the launch bays, their engines burning bright against the darkness of space as they raced toward Earth. Zexter watched them go with satisfaction, knowing that each small craft carried enough firepower to level a human city. The fighters were halfway to the moon when the first alarm sounded. War Master, the sensor officer shouted, his voice cracking with panic. The human stations near the moon are transforming. Transforming? Zexter stood from his chair. What do you mean transforming? The outer panels are retracting, and there are weapons beneath them. Massive weapons that I have never seen before. On the viewing screen, Zexter watched in shock as what he had believed to be harmless mining facilities peeled open like flowers, revealing their deadly centers. Enormous cannons emerged from hidden compartments, each one large enough to threaten a capital ship. The Luna defense grid had awakened. All fighters, evasive action. Vexinar screamed into the communication system. But his warning came too late. The human weapons fired in perfect coordination, and beams of concentrated energy tore through space at impossible speeds. Fighter after fighter exploded in brilliant flashes of light, their pilots never even seeing what killed them in 17 minutes. All 200 fighters were destroyed. The bridge of the eternal conquest fell into horrified silence. Zexter stared at the screen, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. They had lost 200 craft without destroying a single enemy target. This cannot be, he whispered. Those weapons should not exist. But there was no time to process this shock, because something even worse was happening. The civilian orbital platforms around Earth were revealing their true nature one by one. The innocent-looking stations shed their disguises, and warships emerged from within them, not small patrol vessels, but proper warships with armor plating and weapon arrays that glowed with deadly energy. I am counting over 100 human warships, the sensor officer reported, his voice trembling. They were hiding inside the stations this whole time. Admiral Chen Wei's voice crackled through the communication system, and this time there was iron in her words. War Master Zexter, you were warned to leave our system, and now you will understand why. Before Zexter could respond, the space around his fleet erupted into chaos. Small objects burst from hidden launchers all across Earth's orbital space, millions of them spreading outward like a swarm of angry insects. What are those? Vexinar demanded. Drones, the sensor officer screamed. Autonomous combat drones, and there are millions of them. The drone swarm hit the Krothax fleet like a wave crashing against rocks. Each individual drone was tiny, barely larger than a Krothax warrior. But they carried explosive charges, and they were fearless in a way that living pilots could never be. They crashed into shields. They jammed sensors, they clogged engine intakes, and they died by the thousands while accomplishing their purpose. Return fire. Zexter roared. Destroy them all. The Krothax weapons blazed, cutting down drones in vast numbers. But for every one they destroyed, 10 more took its place, and while the fleet was distracted by the swarm, the human warships began their attack. The first volley of human weapons struck the Krothax cruiser Endless Victory, and Zexter watched in horror as the ship simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris, just a flash of light, and then nothing where a massive warship had been moments before. What kind of weapon does that? Vexinar gasped. Railguns, came the cold voice of Admiral Chen through the open channel. Projectiles accelerated to a fraction of light speed, and they carry enough energy to punch through any armor ever created. The human warships fired again and again, their weapons striking with terrifying accuracy. Every shot found its target, and every target dejects. There had never seen such precision, such deadly efficiency. Focus fire on the nearest human ship. He ordered desperately. All weapons, target that destroyer. 20 Krothax vessels turned their guns on a single human warship, a relatively small vessel that bore the name Indomitable on its hull. Human ships should have been destroyed instantly under such overwhelming firepower. Instead, it danced. There was no other word for it. The Indomitable moved with impossible grace, spinning and rolling and accelerating in ways that should have torn any crew apart. Its engines burned continuously, changing direction faster than the Krothax targeting systems could track, and while it danced, it fought back. The small destroyer's weapons fired in rapid succession, and 3 Krothax cruisers died before the Indomitable finally retreated behind Earth's defensive. Zexter felt something he had not experienced. In over a century of conquest, he felt fear. How is this possible? He demanded of his officers. How do they have weapons we have never seen, ships we cannot hit, tactics we cannot predict? No one had an answer for him. The battle raged on. And the Krothax were losing. Their superior numbers meant nothing when they could not land hits on the enemy. When their own ships died with every passing minute. When the drone swarms kept coming without end, War Master, Vexinar said quietly, leaning close so that only Zexter could hear. We should withdraw and regroup. Zexter turned on him with fury in his eyes. Withdraw? He hissed. We are the 7th Conquest Fleet. We have never retreated from any enemy. We have also never faced an enemy like this, Vexinar replied, his voice steady despite his own fear. These humans were prepared for us, and I do not know how, but they knew we were coming. Zexter looked at the tactical display. They had lost 40 ships in less than an hour, and they had destroyed nothing of significance in return. The human casualties were minimal, mostly drones that seemed to be produced endlessly from hidden factories. No, Zexter said finally, straightening his posture. We commit to the assault, War Master. We have 260 ships remaining, Zexter interrupted. That is still enough to overwhelm their defenses if we strike all at once. So order all vessels to advance on Earth at maximum speed. Vexinar hesitated for a long moment. But he was a soldier, and he obeyed his commander. All ships, advance on Earth, he announced. Full assault formation. The Krothax fleet surged forward, burning through the void toward the blue planet that had already cost them. So much Admiral Chun's voice came through one final time. And her words would haunt Zexter until his dying day. Phase 2, she said calmly. Activate the planetary shield array and release the outer system fleet. And then something impossible happened. A massive shield flickered into existence around Earth, covering the entire planet in a shimmering barrier of energy that no weapon could penetrate. But that was not the worst part. Worst part was the hundreds of new signals that suddenly appeared on the Krothax sensors, emerging from the asteroid belt like ghosts waking from a long sleep. 500 human warships that had been hiding in the darkness, towered down and invisible, now roared to life with their weapons hot and their crews hungry for battle. The Krothax were surrounded. The real slaughter was about to begin. The tactical display on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest had transformed into a nightmare made of light and numbers. Hundreds of red dots representing enemy ships surrounded the shrinking cluster of green dots that marked the Krothax fleet. And with every passing second, more green dots vanished forever. War Master Zexter watched his fleet die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Outer System fleet now engaging from behind. A panicked officer shouted, "We are being hit from all directions." The 500 human warships that had emerged from the asteroid belt struck with devastating precision. Their attack perfectly coordinated with the orbital defense forces, already pressing the Krothax from the front. There was no safe direction to turn, no gap in the human lines to exploit, no weakness to target. The humans had planned this trap perfectly. How are they coordinating so effectively? Vexinar demanded. Their ships are acting as one mind across vast distances. A wounded communications officer looked up from his console with blood running down his face. Quantum entangled communications, he said weakly. They are sharing information instantly across their entire fleet, and there is no delay, no lag, no possibility of miscommunication. Zexter gripped the arms of his command chair until his claws left marks in the metal. The Krothax had never developed such technology, had never even believed it was possible. And yet here were these supposedly primitive humans using it as if it were nothing special. All ships, break through the orbital defenses, he ordered. We will reach Earth and bombard the planet directly. The remaining Krothax vessels surged toward Earth's shimmering shield. desperately trying to punch through the human defensive line. But the humans had studied warfare for thousands of years, and they had learned lessons that the Krothax had never needed to. Learn lessons about fighting when outnumbered, lessons about sacrifice, lessons about turning desperation into victory. The first Krothax ship to break through the line was the heavy cruiser Strength Eternal, its captain believing he had found a gap in the human formation. That gap was a trap. 4 human destroyers had deliberately created the opening, and when the Strength Eternal committed to pushing through, they pounced on it from all sides. The destroyers were smaller and weaker than the cruiser, but they fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness. One destroyer took a direct hit that should have destroyed it, but instead of exploding, it kept fighting, its crew willing to die as long as they could take the enemy with them. When the Strength Eternal finally fell, 2 of the human destroyers were crippled beyond repair, but their crews had already evacuated to rescue pods. Their job done. Their sacrifice on a Regex Thar had conquered 47 worlds, and he had never seen anything like it. They throw away their own ships like they mean nothing. He whispered in horrified awe. Not nothing, came Admiral Chun's voice through the communication system, and Zexter realized with a chill that the humans had been listening to his bridge communications this entire time. Every ship that dies today dies protecting Earth. The Admiral continued. Every crew member who falls today falls knowing that their family is safe because of their sacrifice. And that is something worth more than any ship on the tactical display. Another impossibility unfolded. A human heavy cruiser named the Spirit of Terra was surrounded by 7 Krothax vessels, hopelessly outnumbered and cut off from support. Instead of surrendering or attempting to flee, the Spirit of Terra accelerated directly toward the largest enemy ship. They are ramming us, a Krothax captain screamed over the fleet communication channel. They are actually ramming us. The Spirit of Terra plowed into the Krothax dreadnought Unbreakable Will at full speed, and both ships vanished in a ball of nuclear fire that consumed 2 other nearby vessels as well. Kamikaze tactics. The Krothax had no word for it in their language. No concept of warriors who would willingly die to take their enemies with them. It was insane. It was terrifying. It was working. I am picking up strange signals, the communications officer shouted suddenly. The humans are broadcasting something on all frequencies. What is it? Zexter demanded. Recordings, the officer said with confusion in his voice. Audio and visual recordings from other species, dozens of them. And they are all speaking the same words in different languages. The bridge speakers crackled to life, and alien voices began to speak one after another. We were the Tralax hegemony, and we thought ourselves invincible, but then we met humanity. We are the Varathi Collective, and we surrendered to the humans after they destroyed our fleet in 3 hours. This message is from the Zener Republic. Do not fight the humans. Do not threaten their worlds. Do not give them a reason to show you what they are capable of. Zexter listened in growing disbelief. These were warnings from other spacefaring civilizations, species the Krothax had never encountered, all of them speaking of humanity as if they were some kind of galactic nightmare. The humans have fought others before, he realized aloud. They have defended their system before, and we are not the first to try this. We are simply the latest to fail. Vexinar added grimly. The battle continued its terrible course, and the Krothax fleet shrank with every passing minute. Human ships used the debris from destroyed Krothax vessels as cover, hiding behind floating wreckage to ambush passing enemies. Human weapons targeted Krothax command ships specifically, cutting off the fleet's leadership one vessel at a time. Human electronic warfare systems jammed Krothax communications, forcing ships to fight blind and alone. It was not a battle anymore. It was an execution. War Master, a weapons officer called out, his voice carrying a desperate hope. The planet killer cannon is fully charged. Zexter turned to look at him. planet killer was the Krothax's ultimate weapon. A massive cannon that could crack a world's crust and render it uninhabitable. It had never been used in actual combat, only deployed as a threat to force surrender. "If we cannot have this world," Zexter said slowly, the desperation of defeat corrupting his thoughts, "then neither will they." "War Master, no!" Veshinar protested. "That weapon is forbidden except by order of the Emperor himself." "The Emperor is not here," Zexter snarled, "and I will not let these humans humiliate us completely. So charge the weapon and prepare to fire." The massive cannon on the underside of the Eternal Conquest began to glow with terrible energy, drawing power from the ship's main reactor until the entire vessel hummed with destructive potential. But the humans had been watching, had been listening, had been waiting for exactly this moment. "War Master, 3 human ships are on intercept course," the sensor officer screamed. "They are not attacking. They are just flying straight at us." Zexter looked at the tactical display and saw 3 small human frigates racing toward his flagship at impossible speed. They were not firing their weapons. They did not need to. "Evasive action," Zexter commanded, but it was already too late. The first human frigate struck the Eternal Conquest at the exact point where the planet killer cannon connected to the main hull, and the explosion triggered a chain reaction that destroyed the weapon before it could fire. The second frigate hit the engine section, crippling the flagship's ability to move or flee. The third frigate missed its target when Zexter's ship lurched from the previous impacts, but the damage was already done. Bridge was filled with smoke and screaming, and the sound of metal tearing. Zexter pulled himself up from where he had fallen, blood dripping from wounds across his body, and looked at the shattered remains of his command. Center of the tactical display was dark. The communications were dead. The 7th Conquest Fleet was finished. "War Master." Vaxinar's voice came from somewhere in the smoke, weak and broken. "What do we do now?" Zexter had no answer. He had led the mightiest fleet the Krothax Empire had ever assembled, and he had been destroyed by a species that was not supposed to be able to fight back. As emergency lights flickered on and surviving crew members began to drag themselves toward escape pods, a final transmission cut through the static. "You should have turned around at Jupiter," Admiral Chung said calmly, "because now Mars knows you are here, and somewhere beyond the chaos and the dying ships and the floating bodies." Zexter saw the red planet growing larger in the viewport, did not know what awaited him there, but he knew it would be worse than anything he had faced so far. 80 Krothax ships fled toward the red planet called Mars, their engines burning at maximum power as they desperately tried to escape the slaughter behind. The War Master Zexter was among the survivors, his crippled flagship towed by 2 escort vessels, as it limped through space toward what the Krothax believed would be safety. They had entered this system with 300 capital ships and absolute confidence in their victory. Now they ran like frightened prey, hoping only to survive long enough to send the warning to their empire. "The Earth fleet is not pursuing," Vaxinar reported from his position beside Zexter. "It appears they are holding position near their home world." Zexter said nothing. He stood at the broken viewport of his command bridge, watching Mars grow larger with each passing hour, and he felt nothing but cold emptiness where his pride had once been. The 7th Conquest Fleet had been destroyed, 220 ships lost, hundreds of thousands of warriors dead, and they had not even scratched Earth's surface. It was the worst defeat in Krothax history, and it had happened under his command. "War Master," a young officer called out hesitantly. "We are detecting structures in Mars orbit." Zexter turned slowly, his wounded body aching with every movement. "What kind of structures?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Military installations," the officer replied. "Shipyards, defense platforms, weapons arrays, and they are massive. Far larger than anything we saw near Earth." A terrible understanding began to form in Zexthera's mind. "Show me," he commanded. The damaged display screens flickered to life, revealing images captured by long range sensors. What Zexther saw made his blood turn to ice. Mars was not a colony. Mars was a fortress through orbital space around the red planet was filled with military infrastructure that dwarfed everything the Krothax had encountered near Earth. Massive shipyards stretched for hundreds of kilometers, their construction berths filled with warships in various stages of completion. Defense platforms the size of small moons bristled with weapons that made Earth's railguns look like toys and ships. So many ships, arranged in perfect formation around their home world, like a pack of predators waiting to be unleashed. "I am counting over 1,000 warships," the sensor officer said, his voice trembling. "No, wait, there are more coming online. And the number keeps climbing. 1,200 warships," another officer corrected. "At least 1,200. And those are just the ones we can see." Zexther stared at the display in mute horror. Earth's defenses had been terrifying enough, and yet they were nothing compared to what Mars possessed. How was this possible? How could a species that had discovered faster than light travel only 80 years ago build all of this? A communication signal cut through the silence of the bridge, and a new voice filled the broken command center. "Attention, Krothax survivors," the voice said, and it carried an accent different from Admiral Chun's, sharper and harder. "This is Admiral Tarek Hassan of the Martian Independence Navy, and I am very disappointed in you." Disappointed? Zexther could not understand what that word meant in this context. "We have been waiting for someone to try attacking Earth for 60 years, Admiral Hassan continued. 60 years of building ships, training crews, developing weapons that could crack planets in half, and when you finally show up, Earth gets to have all the fun while we just watch." There was actual anger in the human's voice, but it was not the anger of someone threatened. It was the anger of someone who had been denied an opportunity. "Do not misunderstand me," Hassan said. "Earth's forces performed admirably, but they are peacekeepers at heart. Diplomats with guns, and we on Mars are different." The Mars fleet began to move. 1,200 warships broke formation and swept toward the fleeing Krothax remnants like a tidal wave of destruction. Mars was colonized for one purpose, Hassan explained as his ships closed the distance with impossible speed. "We exist to be humanity's blade, the weapon that protects our species when all else fails, and every man, woman, and child on this planet has trained for war since birth." The first Krothax ship to be caught tried to surrender it, broadcast messages of peace on all frequencies, lowered its weapons, and came to a full stop. The Martian response was a single devastating shot that vaporized the vessel completely. "We do not accept surrenders from those who intended to enslave us," Hassan said coldly. "You came here to conquer, to kill, to take everything we have built. And now you will face the consequences." The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 34 minutes. The Krothax ships were already damaged, already demoralized, already broken by their defeat at Earth. They had no chance against fresh Martian forces with superior technology and an absolute lack of mercy. Zexthar watched as his remaining ships were hunted down one by one, each destruction accompanied by the same clinical efficiency. Martians did not just destroy their enemies. They erased them. Ships were not crippled or disabled. They were reduced to atoms, leaving no wreckage, no survivors, nothing to mark that they had ever existed. "Why?" Zexther whispered as another of his ships vanished in a flash of light. "Why do they hate us so much?" Vexinar, wounded and leaning against a broken console, answered with surprising insight. "They do not hate us," he said quietly. "They fear what we represent. And they have turned that fear into strength." The Eternal Conquest was surrounded now. A dozen Martian warships circling it like predators around wounded Prazex, Zector knew he would die in the next few moments. And strangely, he felt at peace with that. He had failed his empire. But at least his death would serve as a warning to others. But the killing shot never came instead. A shuttle docked with the crippled flagship, and Martian soldiers in heavy combat armor stormed the bridge. Zector was dragged from his command chair and thrown to the deck, his arms bound behind his back as human boots pressed against his skull. "This one is the War Master," a Martian soldier reported. "Admiral Hassan wants him alive for interrogation." Alive? Zector did not understand why the humans would want to keep him alive when they had shown no mercy to anyone else hours later. He found himself in a sterile white room deep within a Martian military facility. Facing Admiral Hassan across a simple metal table, Hassan was smaller than Zector had expected, with dark skin and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. But there was something in those eyes that made Zector more uncomfortable than any weapon ever had. "I wanted to meet you personally," Hassan said, "because I want you to understand exactly what happened here." "What is there to understand?" Zector replied bitterly. "We attacked, and we lost." "You lost because you attacked the wrong species," Hassan corrected. "You looked at humanity and saw a young civilization with no military experience. But what you did not see was the truth." He leaned forward across the table, and his voice dropped to something almost like a whisper. "Humanity has been at war with itself since before we could write," he said. "We have spent thousands of years developing new and better ways to kill each other. And when we finally reached the stars, we looked at the universe and we saw how dangerous it was." Hassan's eyes never blinked, never wavered. "Earth is where we keep our hope," he continued. "Our children, our families, our dreams of peaceful coexistence with the galaxy. But Mars is where we keep our rage." He stood up from the table and walked to a window that looked out over the red Martian landscape. "You attacked our hope," Hassan said. "Did you really think we would let you leave?" Zector had no answer. Understood now that the Krothax had not lost because they were weak. They had lost because they had underestimated an enemy that had spent its entire existence preparing for exactly this moment. "You will be kept alive," Hassan said finally. "Your testimony will be recorded, your knowledge extracted, and then you will be sent back to your empire with a message." "What message?" Zector asked. Hassan smiled, and it was the coldest smile Zector had ever seen. "A warning," he said, "about what happens to those who threaten humanity's home." As guards came to take him away, Zector heard one final transmission come through the facility's speakers. "Kuiper Belt Defense Command here," a casual voice announced. "Did we miss the party?" Another hidden fleet, even further out in the cold darkness of space. Zector realized then that everything he had faced, all the death and destruction, had been just a fraction of humanity's true power, and somewhere deep in his chest, the former War Master of the Krothax Empire felt something he had never expected to feel toward any enemy: respect. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Earth, and the solar system had returned to an uneasy peace. The debris fields where Krothax ships had died were slowly being cleared by automated cleanup vessels. The twisted metal and frozen bodies removed to make space safe for travel once again on Earth. Life continued much as it had before the invasion. Children went to school, workers went to their jobs, and families gathered for meals without fear of alien bombardment. The planetary shield remained active, a shimmering reminder in the night sky of what had almost happened. But people had already begun to take its protection for granted. That was the human way. Admiral Shen Wei reflected as she stood in her office overlooking the Pacific Ocean. They had faced extinction and emerged victorious. And within weeks, they were complaining about traffic and weather as if nothing had changed. She supposed that resilience was part of what made humanity so dangerous. A soft chime announced a visitor, and Chun turned to see Dr. Sarah Okonkwo entered the room with a tablet in her hands. "The final casualty reports are complete," Okonkwo said quietly. 1,217 human personnel lost. 23 ships destroyed beyond repair. 0 civilian casualties. Chun nodded slowly, feeling the weight of those 1,200 names pressing against her heart. Every single one of them had died protecting their home, their families, their species. Their sacrifice would never be forgotten. And the enemy losses? She asked. 300 capital ships destroyed. Estimated 450,000 Krothaks dead, Okonkwo replied. Only one survivor was taken prisoner. And he is still being held on Mars for interrogation. War Master Zex Tharchin had reviewed the transcripts of his interrogation sessions, had read his confused and broken attempts to understand how humanity had defeated his mighty fleet in another time. She might have felt pity for him, but he had come to conquer her world, to enslave her people. And she had no sympathy to spare for enemies who showed none to others. "The probe is ready," Okonkwo continued. "Secretary General Santos has approved the final version of the message, and we can launch whenever you give the order." Chun turned back to the window. Watching the waves roll against the shore below the probe would carry humanity's response to the Krothaks Empire. A message that would travel through hyperspace until it reached enemy territory. It would contain the complete battle records, Zexthar's personal logs, and a warning that Chun hoped would prevent any future invasions. But she knew that hope was fragile. There were other empires out there, other species who might look at humanity and see easy prey, just as the Krothaks had. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, and Earth was just one small world in an ocean of stars. "Launch the probe," she ordered finally. "Let them know what happened here." The probe left Earth orbit 3 hours later, its engines carrying it toward the edge of the solar system, where it would make the jump to hyperspace inside its memory banks. It carried the truth of humanity's victory, and at the center of that truth was the message from Secretary General Maria Santos, carefully crafted to speak to every species who might receive it 6 months later. The probe emerged from hyperspace in Krothaks territory. It was immediately captured by a patrol vessel and brought to the imperial capital, where nervous officials debated what to do with it eventually. They decided to play its contents before the emperor himself. Throne room fell silent as the human leader appeared on the massive display screen, her dark eyes meeting the emperor's gaze across the vast distance between their worlds. "To the Krothaks Empire and all who receive this," Santos began, her voice calm and steady. "The 7th Conquest Fleet attacked Earth without provocation, and they were destroyed." Images appeared alongside her words, showing the battle from humanity's perspective. The Krothaks Emperor watched his ships die by the hundreds, watched the humans fight with terrifying coordination, watched the Mars fleet emerge to annihilate the survivors, not defeated. Santos continued, "Destroyed. And what you have seen was a fraction of our defensive capabilities." The images shifted to show Mars, its orbital fortresses and massive shipyards stretching across the void. "You saw our orbital defenses," Santos said. "What you did not see were the Mars fleet's new images appeared, showing weapon systems and installations hidden throughout the asteroid belt, buried beneath the surfaces of distant moons, concealed in the darkness between planets. What you will never see are the weapons we keep hidden in the dark beyond Neptune, in the asteroid belts, in bunkers beneath Earth's crust." The Emperor's advisors exchanged worried glances as the true scope of human military power became clear. "What you encountered was a fraction of our strength," Santos said, "and it was more than enough." Her expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained hard. "Humanity wishes to join the galactic community peacefully," she said. "We hope for diplomacy, trade, and friendship. But understand this." She leaned forward, and her voice took on an edge of steel. We learned long ago that peace is only possible when good people are willing and able to commit absolute violence to defend it. The images behind her showed human history. Wars fought across centuries, weapons developed through millennia of conflict. A species that had turned its own violent nature into an art form. We have colonized our solar system not for expansion, but for defense in depth, Santos continued. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid is a potential fortress. We welcome peaceful contact, but approach with hostile intent, and you will discover that we have spent 200 years making our home, solar system into a grave for anyone foolish enough to attack it. She stood tall, her presence filling the screen despite her small human frame. We are humanity, she declared. We are ready. We have always been ready. And Mars has not even shown you what it can really do. The message ended. And the throne room remained silent for a long moment. The Emperor of the Crothax, ruler of 47 conquered worlds, looked at his advisors and spoke a single command. Mark the human solar system as a forbidden zone. He said quietly, no vessel is to approach within 10 light years of their territory under penalty of death. Across the galaxy, other species received copies of humanity's message as it propagated through information networks and trade routes. Some dismissed it as propaganda. Others studied it carefully, analyzing the battle footage and calculating the odds of successfully attacking Earth. All of them reached the same conclusion: humanity was not worth the risk within a year of the message's broadcast. 15 diplomatic envoys had requested peaceful contact with Earth, and trade negotiations were underway with a dozen alien civilizations where Master Zexter, former commander of the 7th Conquest Fleet, remained on Mars as a prisoner. He spent his days answering questions about Crothax military tactics and his nights staring at the stars through the window of his cell. Sometimes Admiral Hazan would visit him, and they would talk about warfare and philosophy and the nature of power. In one of these conversations, Zexter asked the question that had haunted him since his capture. How did you know we were coming? Hazan smiled and leaned back in his chair. We did not know specifically, he admitted. But we knew someone would come eventually. And the universe is too big and too dangerous for any species to survive without being prepared for the worst. So you built all of this on the chance that you might be attacked someday. We built all of this because we understand something that your empire never learned, Hassan replied. The strong do not survive because they are strong. They survive because they are prepared. And humanity has spent its entire existence preparing for threats that had not yet arrived. Zexter thought about this for a long time on Earth. Admiral Chunwei retired from active service, her duty finally complete after 40 years of preparing for a war she had hoped would never come. She spent her remaining days by the ocean, watching the waves and remembering the names of everyone who had died under her command. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo published her research under the title, The Great Filter and Why Humanity Chose to Build Walls, and it became required reading for every student in the solar system on Mars. Admiral Hazan returned to his duties, always watching the stars for the next threat that might emerge from the darkness. He was disappointed that the Crothax had been so easily defeated, but he knew that someday something stronger would come and Mars would be ready in the Kuiper Belt, far beyond the orbit of Neptune. Humanity's most secret weapons remained silent and waiting though. Alien species knew they existed. No enemy had ever forced them to reveal themselves. They were humanity's final answer to any threat too great for Mars to handle alone, and they would wait forever if necessary. Patient guardians in the endless night. Years later, a Crothax child sat in a classroom on a distant world, learning about the history of the Empire. The teacher displayed an image of a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, and the students leaned forward with curiosity. This is Earth, the teacher said, home of the humans and the location of the 7th Fleet massacre. What happened to the fleet? A young student asked. The teacher paused, considering how to explain the disaster to children who had never known defeat. They learned a lesson that we must never forget, the teacher finally said. Some prey are predators in disguise. The children nodded solemnly, and the image of Earth burned itself into their memories, a warning for future generations.